Hi, I'm Melissa from the Yarn Barn, and today I would like to talk about a book. It's a book that I think is absolutely invaluable, but it's probably under the radar for a lot of weavers. So let's have a look at it. It's called Weaving Designs by Bertha Gray Hays, Miniature Overshot Patterns. So first of all, what is an overshot pattern, miniature or otherwise? Overshot is a structure that has one warp, but two distinct wefts. So it's called a supplementary weft structure, meaning that one of your wefts weaves a plain weave, ground fabric, and then the second weft, which is typically thicker, weaves what we think of as the design or the pattern. And it has been traditionally used for coverlet weaving. And if you've been in a museum or a textile display of some kind, this kind of weaving might look familiar to you. So a background fabric that's probably linen or cotton, and then this, what in this design is blue, pattern that's made out of a wool and used as a bed covering for hundreds of years. So as you can see in this design, this is a large scale pattern. So like this square here is probably as big as my hand. Now you can do overshot on a different scale, and that's where a book like this comes in very handy. If you're wanting to do just a touch of overshot, whether it's the border on a napkin or on a towel or a baby blanket with just a little bit of overshot, a big design like the one we saw in this book can be overpowering. And that's where just a miniature design looks great. So let's look at what this book shows you, and we can compare it to what the larger overshot designs look like. And then I think you'll start to see why this book is so special. So let's look again at some of these larger patterns. So this is Weaving a Traditional Coverlet by Helen Jarvis. It's a book that's not in print now, but if you are fascinated by coverlet weaving, it's well worth finding a secondhand copy. And this is the one where we have this photograph of a historical coverlet. And you can see that it's got multiple elements, this circular element, this table, and then a border that's different from these elements. So a coverlet can be very complex, but if we look here, you can see how large we're talking about. This is a big element, and this is probably larger than my hand. So this is really large scale weaving, and what that means is you can imagine how many hundreds of ends would make up a panel like this. And this is a book on coverlet and counterpane drafts. This is in print by Barbara Miller and Deb Shillow. And this one has a good example of an element that's incredibly beautiful, this one. And this one has 380 ends. Now at 24 ends per inch, this would probably be about 16 inches wide. So you can see this is an element that is designed to be big enough to show up on a piece of fabric as large as a bed covering. But this would completely overwhelm something like a baby blanket, or you could never even put it on a towel or something like that. So keep in mind what this looks like, because we're going to look for something similar in the Bertha Gray Hayes book. So this is the 380 end motif. And if you look at this motif and isolate just that, you can see how similar they look. So it's a very similar element. Here's an X shape, and then these kind of radish-shaped elements, 4 of those. So if you wanted to do something that looked similar to this big motif, but on a smaller scale, this one only has 58 ends and suddenly becomes very usable for all kinds of smaller fabrics, like towels, like scarves, like baby blankets. And it's also something that's easier to tackle for a beginning overshot weaver. The potential to make a mistake in threading on something as large as this, I mean, it's going to happen. With something as small as this, with only 58 ends, it's so much easier to handle and so much more welcoming as a first overshot project. So So that's one reason I love this book. It makes Overshot doable for not only a wider range of projects, but also for people with a wider range of experiences in Overshot. So transforming a large motif down to a small motif is great. And if 58 ends is too many, here's the same kind of motif, but on an even smaller scale with only 22 ends. So the one thing, number one, that I like is the scale, but the second thing is Bertha Gray Hayes was weaving in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and a lot of the designs she made reflect her experience at that time. So for example, here is a very unique looking design. It's called Bomber Flight, and it's very asymmetrical. And you don't see that in these traditional Overshot designs. They are so often very symmetrical. And so to see something like this, it just looks so dynamic. So that's one example. I love this one. It's just a fun overall design, but not static looking. It's very dynamic. This one as well. This is such a fun one. It's very diagonal, but again, a fun texture, kind of visual texture that you could use that looks so different from these traditional designs, but it's the same structure. Now, the last question is, what are examples of this being used? And so I've done two projects using motifs out of this. So the first one is the one that we looked at just a second ago. So I really liked this little element, and so I did an Overshot inlay. So this is just a tonal dyed linen warp, that same yarn as the weft, and then inlaid these little motifs with a heavier linen. And you can see this little element is right here. So these little designs are easy to just drop in to a fabric using inlaying. Then another one I did uses this design called Jitterbug, which is just so fun. There's just so much going on there. Now this is a 62 silk warp and tabby weft and a 32 silk pattern weft. You can see how just this simple design could become this fabric. So once again, that's Weaving Designs by Bertha Gray Hayes, Miniature Overshot Patterns, and I hope you start to love this book as much as I do.